Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Tessa Tubbs Podcast, the space where leadership gets real practical and deeply personal. I'm your host, Tessa Tubbs, and I'm so glad you're here. Today's conversation is one I know many of you will lean in for. We're exploring the world of 360-degree feedback, not the check the box, one and done way many leaders have experienced. Instead, we're talking about how to make feedback actually drive behavior change that sticks. To help us unpack this, I'm joined by someone who has spent decades at the forefront of feedback systems and leadership development. Bruce Bennett, founder and CEO of Star 360 Feedback. Bruce has worked with hundreds of organizations worldwide, developing technologies and feedback systems that create permanent positive behavior change. Simply put, he knows how to turn insight into real lasting change. Bruce, welcome to the podcast.
Tessa, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
So, so many leaders have experienced a 360 process that felt confusing, painful, or even forgettable. But when done well, it can be a catalyst for real transformation. So as you listen, I want you to think about where feedback shows up in your world and how it could be more of a powerful lever for growth. Bruce, you've spent your career helping organizations get 360s right. From your perspective, why do 360 feedback processes work when they work? And where do they most often go off the rails?
Tessa, that's a really good question. It's interesting. It's in the design itself, in that people focus on the wrong thing from the beginning. We work with organizations and they spend all their time focusing on developing an effective questionnaire, making sure the feedback collection process is easy, and then delivering a report that provides all the data. And then they tack on action planning almost as an afterthought. And so from the very beginning, the expectation is you're going to get all of this data and it will help you increase your self-awareness. And if you choose to do something with it, well, that's kind of up to you. We'll put that on at the very, very end. The organizations that we see do it really, really well integrate the expectation of action planning from the very, very beginning and integrate the idea that the purpose is designed not just for self-awareness, but designed to help people change. And so that changes how they write the invitations. It changes, ironically, a lot of organizations spend the most of their time building the online process and making sure that that fits with their company.
Right.
That's probably the least leverage in the entire process when it comes to actually helping people use the feedback to create change.
No, I was going to say that's an excellent point, because I have seen that many times myself, where too much time is built on the front end and not enough time on the back end. And I think, the point you're making, data is important to shape the outcome, but data really needs to be mapped back to intended, what are you actually trying to accomplish? And how do you build that into more than just the shaping of the information, but the action planning and intentionally building that into the design element to start with? Does that make sense? Am I tracking with what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, there's a few tests that we encourage clients to do. Like a 360 feedback report is really where the leader gets to interact with and understand their feedback. Everything before that is just a process to get them to that point. So one of the things that we encourage clients to do when they're evaluating their 360 reports is just pull it out and see if the action planning is a one-page addition to the very end of the survey. And if it is, they're kind of communicating, look, we want you to dive into all of this data and understand all of the data. And again, action planning, not that important.
That's a good point. And so to our listening audience, I want to encourage you to think about, 360 assessments you've gone through, or for some of you who are dialed up to have a 360 done in the near term. Think about what Bruce has shared, right? Really focus on how do you leverage the insights and information to really shape what are you going to do next? How do you turn this into real action plan so that there's the adjustment that you need made, your team need made, and your organization is looking from you. Thanks a lot, Bruce, for that.
Just one other point on that. It's interesting. If you look at it, most organizations approach it sequentially. They collect the data, they then report the data, and then they do the action planning. And what we found is that by the time people get through all of the data, they're pretty exhausted. And so they're saving the most important part to when they have the least amount of energy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What we've tried to do, and what I think we've done successfully, is we actually integrate the action planning from page one of the report. So as people work through the report and look at the data, each page is taking them a step closer to developing their action plan. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But it's a difference between action planning as an afterthought and action planning integrated through the process.
I think that's actually quite encouraging to hear, because, one of the biggest challenges I do hear from leaders is that, how do you translate this feedback into something that you can action? And the fact that the solutions you bring to bear starts with action in mind, I think is a differentiator. As you partner with organizations, both, it sounds like, in just the way your report is built out, how else do you help leaders turn their 360 data into clear, usable 60, 90-day action plans?
So one of the key issues for us is helping leaders prioritize. Okay. There's an expectation that when people get 45 pages of data, they understand 45 pages of data before they actually build their action plan, right? But the reality is, if the organization's investing in 360 feedback to help people improve their skills, if they improve one skill and do it well, that teaches them how to take their feedback and improve the skill. And then they can go back and they can repeat another skill. And so one of the questions I like to ask as I'm working with organizations is, how much data do they need to understand in order to pick one skill and focus on that one skill and improve? And universally, organizations come back and say they just need to understand a high level picture. They need to be able to prioritize and get really clear insights and then pick that skill and improve it. And so one of the things that we encourage organizations to do to overcome data overload is, at the very beginning of the process, when a leader's going through their data, look at the insights the report provides, and then prioritize those and focus on those that they feel are most important, and take that insight and literally immediately start working through some action steps with that insight, and then look at the rest of the data in a way that will help them with that insight. But again, we have a report which has become our most popular report, where at the beginning we set the expectation that the purpose is improvement. Right. And then we provide insights, one page of insights, and then we say, pick an insight and let us walk you through an action planning process. And then we put all the traditional data at the end. And we have a lot of leaders who use the first part of the report and succeed in improving a skill, and then go back to the traditional data to pick the next one. And then we have leaders that are engineers and accountants that like to, dig through all the details at the end and find all that stuff and make sure they understand everything. But the report's still designed to help them go through and dig just one item and take kind of a deep dive and improve on that.
I like that notion of both managing data overload, because you're right, trying to digest 45 pages of information is a lot to consume. But even the approach you use to prioritize the information. So if you get back all this data, what really matters, right? I like to say in my coaching work, when I have 360 information or assessment information, the tagline I often use is, so what, who cares, right? Like, this is a whole bunch of information. Right. What of this, right, is value added, and what do we want to do? What actions do we want to take? What do we really want to do about it? And the fact that you're suggesting just start one step at a time makes it far more digestible for people. I mean, it's so much overload. People, like most of the times, people who are going through 60 assessments, the last thing they have is the commodity of time, right? And so how do you integrate one step change that adds value? I think that's really important. And I want to encourage my listening audience, right? You can go back to the 360 resources you've used or have done in the past and apply what Bruce is sharing right now. Take a look and identify one step you can actually take in the next 30 days to drive change. And for those who are interested in utilizing, the resource that Bruce is talking about, we'll share more at the end where you can get information about his particular insights and reports and the way that he and his organization approaches the 360 process. I think this is fantastic because we just overload people very often. With the 360 data, and we spend way more time talking about what's not working than we spend time talking on what's working as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that observation, Tessa, because we overload people with data and then we overload people with negativity.
Right.
And that's very discouraging,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, it is.
So one of the other things that we recommend is we start with strengths. And what we do, it's the same thing. We ask people to pick one strength that they can use to improve the skill that they want to improve. So what we're doing is helping them start with confidence and start with an understanding that they're capable, and then use that confidence and capability to improve what it is that they're working on.
You're bringing up the interesting notion about feedback, right? Feedback can be uncomfortable, both for the person giving it and the one receiving it. And I think to your point, we over-index on the negative and don't always focus enough on the positive. I'm just curious, what are some of the best ways to either brief raters or debrief leaders so that the process builds trust and momentum instead of shame or defensiveness? So how do you support both people involved in the process?
So so in large organizations, it's hard to brief raters. The key to briefing raters is what you put in the invitation, because most organizations don't want to pull a group of raters into a meeting and say, now you're going to provide feedback. Let me teach you how to give the feedback. Because from a practical standpoint, it's just too expensive, right? To take them off the line to do that, to take them. So what we really encourage is that the invitations that go out they're short, but they're really focused on the culture. They focus on the importance of giving honest feedback, and they promise anonymity. And so raters expect right up front that there is going to be anonymity, and then that anonymity be protected all the way through the process. And that encourages that honesty on the part of the raters. For the leaders, for us, it's really important so typically a 360 debrief is, in our experience, as we've seen it in many organizations, is really focused on, let me help you understand your feedback. And it's an hour of slogging through all the feedback details. And we approach that a little bit differently in that we talk about, let's look at your priorities in the organization. Let's look at those feedback areas that connect best with those priorities. And then let's look at something that you're doing well. And then let's pick something to improve. And as I mentioned, let's take that thing that you're doing well and then work on it to improve. So I have to share one of my favorite stories. We were hired by an organization. The leader of the organization, it was a scientific organization. The leader had actually won a Nobel Prize. He was absolutely brilliant, and everybody in the organization hated him because he had zero people skills.
Oh,
And they called us and they said, so we want you to do a 360 feedback with him, a 360 feedback survey, and help him improve his people skills. And so we did the survey. The results came back as predicted. He got 5s on everything analytical. He got 5s on everything people skills wise. He got 2 and 1s and 2s on. And the comments were really, really harsh. And I was the one that had to do the debrief with him. And so I looked at this and I thought, how do you give someone this feedback without absolutely destroying them, right? So what we did is we opened his report and I went through and I said, it looks like you're really, really good at analytical skills. It looks like that you knock it out of the park in terms of solving problems, in terms of being able to research and get data. Do you like doing experiments? And he said, yeah, actually, I love doing experiments. I'm really, really good at experiments. So I said, so let's take that and let's look at this data that isn't so good, and let's see if we can construct some experiments around this data.
That's clever.
And he went, "Ooh, I can do that. Yeah." And by the end of the debrief, he was so motivated and so excited to go in. And we had identified he was going to go into a meeting and he was going to just take notes of how people responded to him in the meeting and do that for a week and just track that. And then he was going to go in and choose not to interrupt people. And instead of interrupting them, asking them the question, "Tell me more." And then take notes about that and see how people responded to that. So it was really interesting. By being able to focus on his strengths and use that to help him build something, he actually went through, I don't think he ever at the core changed into, I want to be someone who's really involved in someone else's life and anxiously encouraged in them. But what he did do is he changed his approach by saying, if I ask people, "Tell me more," instead of interrupting them and cutting them off, I get better results. And that was able to motivate him to change his meeting behavior. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
That makes total sense. I love the example of both, being mindful about creating safe space. As you said, you saw the data, you're going in with the leader and you're trying to figure out, how do we walk through this without it decimating him, because, the feedback was harsh and the scores were low. So I think even just starting there as coaches and leaders who are debriefing with folks, being very intentional and mindful about how do we create safety and an environment where people can digest, right, what needs to be said. I think the second thing that struck me about what you shared, because it's a tactic that as a coach we use often, is we encourage people to place themselves in a position where they're observing the room, as opposed to sort of entrenching themselves in the space. What I loved about what you did was you didn't just utilize that as a common methodology to teach growth and learning, but you actually did it in a way that you facilitated co-creation of that as an approach, right? So it wasn't something you as the coach told him as the coachee or the leader to do, but you invited him into the process. It was something that was co-identified in the experimentation exercise, right, that was created. So I think that's another key takeaway, is how do you drive co-creation, even when one of the outcomes may be a standard tactic, right, that coaches use, but in a way that that leader was able to identify, own, and embrace and lean into the process. So I think that, what you're sharing are great examples of both that safety space and that co-creation with leaders to be able to digest and really action the information that's being shared.
Well, thanks. Thank you. I mean, when we look at a 360 debrief, our measure of success is, does the person walk out of the debrief with the confidence that they can actually improve their skill, with the clarity about what it is that they need to do? Are they motivated to do that? And have they taken ownership of that? Those four things are how we measure whether or not a debrief is successful, as opposed to, do they understand all of their feedback? Can they tell me what the feedback on page 37 means?
Right. Well, I just want to encourage my audience listeners to really take heart to what you've just shared. And I have a lot of coaches that I hear from who listen to this podcast. I think these are some great tips and tactics for us in the coaching field to, both create that safety, create that sort of co-partnership or co-design with our leaders. But I think your illustration, it's, what's the end in mind? Is it they understood all the dot points, or they actually have a clear game plan? They feel confident being able to apply and implement. Because at the end of the day, that's the difference we're trying to make. So I think these are fantastic suggestions you're putting out there.
Well, thank you. And the thing that we've actually learned with coaches too, if a coach can get a leader to where they have an action plan by the end of the debrief, then that sets them up to go in and do further improvement coaching and application and implementation coaching. And the leader has more, the leader has ownership of the process, but the coach's role shifts from being a data interpreter to a change agent And really, leaders hire coaches to be change agents.
100%. You've worked with a ton of organizations over the years, and you've just, shared an example of how 360 feedback really shifted behavior in a meaningful way. Um, Tell me a little bit about, what do you see are common ways that 360 data really, I guess maybe share some other examples of where you've worked with clients over the years where that behavior shift has changed. I mean, we're not always going to have the extreme, example of the Nobel Peace Prize winner with, low people results.
Sure.
A lot of times you have people who are just sort of in the middle, right? And so where do you drive that shift in the behavior in a way that adds value to both them and that ecosystem and their, sort of personal sense of growth and development as well?
Sure. So we love the phrase developmentally self-reliant. And our
Okay.
goal is to help leaders become developmentally self-reliant, meaning they understand how to develop their own skills and they take ownership of developing their own skills on an ongoing basis. And so we look at 360 feedback as an opportunity not only to help them develop an individual skill, but to help them develop their overall development competency, their development capability, so that when they're not doing a 360, they can still collect feedback and act on that feedback. So there's a couple things that we try to do in that process. One is the action planning process itself. A lot of times 360 action planning will be, here's a skill you want to improve. Here's some books that you can read. Here's some training courses that you can go to. And those are good. But it's very easy. It requires the person to take time off the job to do it or do something in their spare time, which disconnects it from the job. And so what they do has got to be connected to their job. So essentially what we've developed is a process where once they prioritize the skill that they want to improve, we encourage them to have conversations with coworkers about how to improve that skill. And the reason we do that is because, let's say a 360 survey says that I need to improve my listening skills. It doesn't tell me if I need to ask better questions, maintain better eye contact, change my body language, not interrupt. There's a whole host of things I can do to improve my listening skills. And the 360 survey hasn't given me that data.
Right.
It's just pointed me in that direction. And so the only way that people can actually learn those skills is to have conversations with people that they work with. So we've developed a process where what we encourage people to do is identify what they want to improve, identify people in their organization who do that well, and then have a conversation with those people, because we don't want them to go back to their raters. Remember, anonymity is really, really important. So we never want them to go back to their raters and say, hey, I got these scores. What score did you give me? How, we absolutely want to avoid that. But I can look around my organization and see who does listening well. And I can go to those people and say, can you coach me a little bit on listening? And there's another interesting thing that happens here, because I can take the list of people that I've identified and I can go to my manager,
Right.
And I can say to my manager, hey, I'm going to work on my listening skills. Here's some people in the organization I think do it well. Who do you think does it well? Who should I add to the list, or should I take some of these people off the list? And that has a really interesting impact on managers, because managers are pushed to be coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked to a lot of managers who say, I feel like a hypocrite coaching because I don't do this skill well. And then my employee comes to me and says, okay, can you coach me on this skill? And I'm struggling with that skill anyway.
Mm-hmm.
This way, it gives the manager an opportunity to provide feedback on the process and coach the employee along the process without having to be a content expert. If they are a content expert, great, they can be on the list, right? And they can give that coaching. So anyway, so what we've tried to do is develop an action planning process that integrates into the workplace without requiring large commitments of time on the part of the people who are supporting the leader, where it's just a very natural conversation process, a natural kind of workflow for both the peers and the managers. that are supporting the leader.
I think that's a really powerful story. And it's a great reminder that feedback isn't just about the numbers or the data, but to your point, it's about how, helping people grow and in a self-reliant way. As I'm listening to your story, it's such a thoughtful approach. I mean, I've seen so many times organizations, like you say, like, oh, read this book or download this on audiobooks or attend this class. And that may give you, a transfer of knowledge, maybe at best, but to your point, it can be time consuming to do that. But when you have what you're describing, the opportunity to identify people inside of your organization who do what you do well, it'll work because it's inside of that ecosystem, right? And they're successful within that ecosystem. I also think the thoughtfulness of facilitating the coaching process with the manager versus being responsible for, content expertise, as you're saying, takes the pressure off of everyone and allows people to play the role that they can play, right, in the growth and development of these leaders. So I think these are wonderful examples. And I want to encourage our listening audience to think about what kind of story they want their teams to tell about working with them from a year from now. One of the things you just said was you don't have to wait to actually have a 360 to start doing this, that, self-reliance and growth and development. And so in the absence of a 360, who do you want to be? Who do you want to become? And how do you start embarking on that journey now and identifying one skill area you're going to grow in, identify one person in your organization that demonstrates that skill set, and maybe start having some conversations to learn how you can incorporate some of what they do and how you do it, which will change the trajectory that you experience, and those around you experience from you as well. So thank you, Bruce, for sharing that tidbit. That's really fantastic.
Yeah, you're welcome. And the other interesting side effect of that is as people have those conversations at work, they're building an informal support structure to help them succeed in what they're doing. And we know that social influence is a significant factor in helping people gain success, right? So when they go talk to those people and say, you're great at listening, give me some coaching on listening, when those people see them, they're going to say, so how's your listening coming?
Right.
And it will build that social support, which helps them succeed long term, long after they kind of put their report away.
This is the time of year that often I see organizations are, rolling out or deploying 360 processes. So I'd love for you to speak to our audience members who are about to embark on a 360 process for themselves. If you could offer one practical piece of advice to a leader, what would it be?
It would be to go into it with the expectation that you're going to change your behavior. Focus more on the behavior change than you are on the data, because the data gets you started, but the behavior change is what's going to make a difference in your career.
I love that. I think, just to accentuate what you're saying, I think for leaders to really focus on curiosity instead of defensiveness, and really what's the behavior change. And I like that, even the example you gave earlier of treat it like an experiment, right? Be curious going in, stay open to, what kind of change you're actually trying to drive, and write that down and be really intentional about implementing that. I think that's a fantastic tip. Thanks for sharing that, Bruce.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. Well, I think the other thing is with feedback, we have a tendency to focus only on the negative.
That's true.
And only on what needs to be improved. And again, if the end goal is for people to be able to improve their performance, they need to believe within themselves that they can improve their performance. And so if you only focus on the negative, right, people are not going to be motivated. They're going to be discouraged, and they're going to be overwhelmed. And if you can tie in the positive, that can give them some motivation and confidence to be able to succeed.
That's awesome. Bruce, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your stories with us today. Before we close, where can listeners learn more about you and Star 360 Feedback?
Our website is star360feedback.com. We have a YouTube channel too. If you search Star 360 Feedback on YouTube, it'll bring up our YouTube channel. Or you can always give us a call at 801-489-1211 or email me at bbennett@resultsbystar.com. Our name, resultsbystar.com, is different than our actual corporate name. But we do that because what we want to communicate is that when people work with us, we're going to focus on results, not just data.
Awesome. And to our audience, we've also created a free companion resource to help you apply what we've discussed today. You can find it in the show notes or at tessatubbs.com. And if you enjoyed this conversation, I'd love for you to stay connected. Follow me on LinkedIn, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or visit tessatubbs.com for more leadership tools and inspiration. I'm Tessa Tubbs, and this has been another episode of the podcast. Until next time, lead the change you envision. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Tessa. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.